Ciao, everyone, and welcome back to Growth Talks. I'm Raf, your host, and my guest today is Andrea Pacini. Hi, Andrea, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Raffaele. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, me too, man. So I know that you have, watched several episodes of this podcast. So I know that you know the first question, but we usually start, with a simple one, with a classic, and it's telling us your story. So, who's Andrea? What's the story?
Sure. I'll give you something, and then of course, Raf, feel free to take it wherever you want. But I'm a presentation coach, and the reason why I'm so passionate about all things public speaking is because when I was a little kid growing up in Italy, like you, I grew up in a family of very small business owners. My parents have always been running their own very small business together. They still do. And so as a kid, I saw their challenges because raising four kids while trying to run a business is not easy. As you know, Raf, I have one, and that's already enough for me. So four kids, it wasn't easy. But I also saw their spark and entrepreneurial mindset, the proactive approach to life. And so that's why I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, to try and run my own thing. Now, I don't know about you, Raf, but for me, in reality, that remained a dream for a long time because before doing what I do now, I tried many things, I started many projects, all of them failed. But it was useful because in that process, what I realized was that there are so many great ideas that fail, not because of the ideas themselves, but just because of the way they are presented or communicated. And that's why, then, to cut it short for you, that's why eventually I became a presentation coach. That's why my mission is to stop great ideas from failing just because of the way they are presented. My vision, Raf, if you want, is to help hundreds of thousands of business leaders inspire their audiences, increase their influence, and why not make a positive impact in the world. I believe that we can make a positive impact in the world, and we can do that thanks to the power of our communication.
Wow. Just out of curiosity, what's your parents' business?
They do. So I come from Le Marche, which is, as you know, a small region in the middle of the country. And in our region, everybody makes shoes. And so they are in the shoe business. They don't make the final product. So they make just the sole of the shoes. But they are in the shoe business.
And do you think that there is something of what you are doing now today that somehow started over there? I mean, apart from the main idea of helping people presenting their ideas, uh, do you think there is something that you learned, watching them, observing them, and observing the way they were running the business, and of course, presenting ideas to customers and stakeholders and others.
What I've learned has very little to do with presenting and public speaking, but the main thing I've learned, which is for me much more important than that, is an approach to life. And so when I said that, I could see the proactive approach to life, not expecting that, like, for example, if there's a problem, not expecting somebody else to solve that problem on your behalf. Just that spark, that creativity that you have to have if you want to run your own thing. It's impossible to do it. So more than a specific skill, because industries are completely different, the context is completely different. They do their business, they run their business at a very local level in a very small town. I'm here like you in London, so different types of clients, different industry, but the approach is definitely something that I picked up from them.
Uh, you said in a few minutes ago that you believe that sometimes there are great ideas and they the project fails because the way they present it. What do you mean by that?
So I'll give you a few examples. Like in my case, for example, many years ago, talking about maybe more than 10 years ago, I had a blog. The blog was called Echo Presentation. So it was about mainly presentation design, the design side of things, although today I cover other aspects. Presentation design is still part of it, but it's a small part. And my objective was to write articles that as many people as possible would read. Now, after a few years, I was very consistent, not as consistent as you are, Raf, but every week, more or less, I would write an article, publish it. I was super proud of it. And in a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, maybe two people in total read my articles, and one was my wife. And the idea of a good blog on that specific topic was not, I think that it was not a bad idea, but the way that the overall thing was packaged and communicated was not super effective. Or I another thing I tried was, instead of creating content, I then tried to curate content. So I launched a newsletter, always in the same space, but instead of creating content, I would collect what I thought was the best content out there every single week on all things public speaking, communication, presentation skills, and then I would send it out. And again, the dream was to have thousands of subscribers. After 2 or 3 years, I had 119 subscribers. So not enough. And again, I think that the idea was not a bad one, but the way it was, we can talk about, of course, there is an execution element, and that also plays a big role. But from my perspective, I also think about that the communication side of things, the way things are packaged and communicated, makes a big difference.
Hmm. The way things are packaged and communicated. Sometimes, in your world, there are people's, and I think also experts. Sometimes they say that the secret, for a good presentation is to be just be yourself. That's what they say, at least. Try to be authentic. You are on the stage, be yourself, and everything is going to be fine. Is that true? Is that enough to be yourself, to be authentic, or there is something else?
I cringe when I hear this piece of advice, and it is true. It comes from experts. Just be yourself, be authentic. And for those who have tried to just be themselves and be authentic, and then they say, "Yeah, I've tried, but what else can I do?" Because obviously there is room for improvement. So in my book, for example, Rough Confident Presenter, there is one chapter where I say you don't have to be authentic, which may sound counterintuitive, but I do believe that you don't have to be authentic. So, for example, if you want to learn to play the piano or any other musical instrument, and if the teacher tells you that you need to sit up straight and have a certain posture and move your fingers in a certain way, would you tell the teacher, no, I'm not going to do that because I want to be authentic, I want to play my own way? No, you would just shut up and listen to the teacher. Or if you secretly think that your best friend's new baby is ugly, would you tell them because you just want to be authentic, you want to be yourself, and that's what you say? No, again, you would just shut up and say that the baby is beautiful. I'm saying this because there are many areas in our life where we accept the fact that it does not make sense to be authentic, and we are not authentic. And the same is true when it comes to public speaking. When I work with clients, for example, I encourage them to do certain things that sometimes take them outside of their comfort zone. And because of that, they resist. And they resist in the name of authenticity. No, this it doesn't work for me. I just want to be myself. I want to be authentic. Of course, you want to be yourself. This is not about being Steve Jobs. You don't have to be like Steve Jobs. You don't have to present like Brené Brown. Of course, you want to be yourself. But at the same time, you also want to be and become the best authentic version of yourself. So that's why I think that authenticity, so from this perspective, is not the goal.
And how do you find this balance? Because from what you said, it looks like there is a balance somewhere in the middle. So you need to learn something, as you say, you listen to the teacher, but you maybe also want to have your own style. Uh, is that a thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you need to have some foundational skills. Foundational skills in terms of, for example, how do I develop a message which is simple for the audience to understand, clear for them to follow,
Mm.
relevant to the audience and their needs? How do I develop a presentation which is engaging as well? So these are some foundational skills. If you want to reinforce your message visually, then, for example, you need to have some foundational skills in terms of how to avoid the typical death by PowerPoint with lots of text and bullet points. People can't read and listen at the same time. You also need to have some foundational skills in terms of how to make a strong connection with the audience. And you do that with your delivery skills. So these are things like eye contact, body language, gestures, posture, voice. Voice is a very powerful communication tool. So we need to have those foundational skills. This can only come with acquiring knowledge and practicing, because by the way, any skill that public speaking is a skill that requires knowledge and technique. And when we have this combination of knowledge and technique, what really makes a difference is practice. So we need that. But then as you practice and as you do it for real, of course, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you apply these foundational skills and make them work for you based on what works for you, for your context, for your own style.
Hmm. I'm thinking about there's like a famous quote, I think from Picasso, I'm not sure, that says that you need to know the rules if you want to break the rules. Uh, is this what you're saying?
Also, that's connected. So, for example, if we think about just presentation design, which again is not even the most important thing. So if you want to be a more credible, confident, and an effective, compelling communicator, presentation design is an aspect which may or may not be relevant. Sometimes we don't have to use slides all the time, for example. But if we just take that as an example, there are some fundamental principles of presentation design, like things like, without going into too many details, but picture superiority effect. So we remember visuals much more than just words, or the rule of thirds. I don't know if you're familiar with the rule of thirds, that which comes from photography. You have the principle of white space, which tells us that the more it doesn't have to be white, but it's called white space. But the more empty space we have on a slide, the better. Again, it's counterintuitive, but the more empty space we have, the easier it is for the audience to focus on the one thing, the one message that you want to get across. So these are, going back to Picasso, these are some rules, if you want. But then that's what photographers do. So the rule of thirds is a rule that comes from photography. But if you take all the like super professional photos out there, it's not that all of them apply the rule of thirds. We know the rule, we know the principle, but only if you know them, yes, do you have the power, if you want, to break them. But you want to break them consciously. That's the
Mm.
key. Often people do it unconsciously. We break rules all the time without even knowing that we are doing it. But if you break the rules consciously, that's a different story.
I want to go back on the idea of being a confident presenter. You said it twice, and it's also the name, the title of your book. Um, what does it mean being a confident presenter? I mean, is it about delivering skills, or there is something else?
So of course, your delivery skills are important, but, and thanks for the question, because that's exactly why I wrote the book. I wrote the book and I called it this way because there is a bit of a misconception. When I talk about confidence in presenting, a lot of people immediately start thinking about delivery skills. Again, things like eye contact, body language, gestures, voice, posture. Important things. That's also what we do when we work with our clients, but it's just a small part of the whole process. So confidence comes from three things. First of all, familiarity and preparation. For example, Ralph, some time ago, I watched a video where Kobe Bryant, so one of the best NBA players of all time, unfortunately, he passed away, and he was giving an interview. And one question was, Kobe, how is it possible that every time I see you playing, you always look so confident? And he said, the only reason the only reason why you think I'm confident is because when you see me doing certain things, I've done those things 1,000 times before. Confidence comes from familiarity and preparation. And the same is true when it comes to public speaking. The other thing is that it also comes from following a certain process, which goes far beyond just opening up a presentation tool and putting together some slides. There's a structured way of thinking about presenting, from, for example, knowing how to analyze your audience and their needs and the context, to knowing how to identify your key messages, brainstorming in a creative and structured way for you to identify your key messages, to knowing how to translate your ideas into a clear and engaging storyline from the very beginning, where you want to be able to capture your audience's attention, to the very end with a powerful conclusion. You also need to be able to, if you need it, to reinforce your message visually, avoiding death by PowerPoint. And you also need to be able to deliver your message in a way that's comfortable and convincing. So there's a process, there's a structured way of thinking about presenting, and not following the process is often what creates discomfort when we are in front of an audience. So familiarity, process, and then it also comes from being able to develop a compelling message. So there are three key skills that we need to master, Raf. Message, so your ability to develop a compelling message. If you need to visualize your message, that's the other thing. So avoiding death by PowerPoint. And the other one is your delivery skills. But for me, 80% of your confidence comes from your ability to develop a compelling message. Without a message, without a story that resonates with the audience, it doesn't matter how good you are from a delivery perspective. It doesn't matter what you do with your hands, for example. It doesn't matter what you do with your eyes. Message comes first.
Can you tell me more? I mean, that's kind of it's bold, it's powerful. I mean, the idea that 80% of the final result is from the message. I read a lot of book about public speaking. I watch a lot of tutorials and then keynotes and stuff. And there is a lot going on about body language, and tone of voice and using your hands and these kind of things. But you said that that's important, but it's just a small part of the whole process of the whole thing.
Yeah. So I'll tell you. One thing which is also very much connected to the biggest problem I see when it comes to public speaking, which is connected to developing a compelling message, or the opposite, which is the curse of knowledge. And we want to avoid that. Now, the curse of knowledge is a principle, if you want, that I've learned many years ago when I read a fantastic book. I know that you love books, and maybe you know the book, Raf, Made to Stick by the Heath brothers. Do you know the book? Yeah. So a fantastic book which is all about how to make sure that when you communicate an idea, it gets stuck in the minds of your audience, made to stick. And in that book, they cite an example, a Stanford University study where a psychology student in 1990 asked two groups of people to play a game, tappers versus listeners. I don't know if you know the game, Raf, but you have the tappers, and what they have to do is they need to tap out rhythms of famous songs on a table. So think about very famous songs like Happy Birthday to You, songs like that. But instead of singing the songs, you have to tap them out on a table. And then you have the listeners, and all they had to do was they just had to try and guess the songs. Now, before the experiment started, the student asked the tappers to guess how many songs the listeners would have guessed. And the tappers estimated 50% of the songs. That's what they thought. Now, in reality, the listeners only guessed 2.5% of the songs.
Wow.
Massive difference. 2.5 versus 50%. Why? Because if you are a tapper, you have knowledge that the listeners don't have, because you have the songs in your head as you play them. And so for you, it's very obvious. And that's why you find it very hard to understand why they can't guess them. But if you are a listener, you don't have the knowledge. You don't have the songs in your head. And so for you, it's not obvious at all. And this is the number one problem in communication, which is connected to knowing how to develop a compelling message. It's not connected to your delivery skills. The number one problem in communication is the curse of knowledge, which means that once we know something, we find it hard to imagine what it means not knowing it. So, for example, in your case, Raf, if I think about you, your story, your background, you come from a very technical background. But even now that you have your academy on artificial intelligence, for example, so when we talk about artificial intelligence, then there's a risk there, because depending on who the audience is, if we are communicating certain ideas to an audience, and if that audience doesn't have the same level of knowledge about artificial intelligence, for example, then depending on the language that we use, we may make it harder for them to understand it. So the curse of knowledge is our inability to imagine what it means not knowing what we know. It's our inability to put ourselves in the audience's shoes. And if you think about it, Raf, we say everywhere. You say between politicians and voters, between writers and readers, between sellers and buyers, and you see between public speakers or communicators in general and the audiences. And I'll close here, it's very, very easy to fall into this trap unless you find a way to get access to some sort of an external perspective.
If you are enjoying this episode, please check out my lead generation course. You can watch it for free on gaito.link/skillshare, GAITO. As an entrepreneur, marketer, or business owner, you know how crucial lead generation is. In this course, I'll be sharing with you 20 proven tactics for lead generation in both B2B and B2C markets. You can watch it for free on gaito.link/skillshare, GAITO. You'll find the link in the description. I was thinking about my doctor and my accountant. When I talk to them, I mean, there is that situation every single time. They use like technical words, jargons. I don't really understand what they're saying, and they don't even try to make me understand. So I got you.
and Raf, so going back to your question, and so that's the issue, which is not a delivery skills issue. You may be very, very good with your delivery skills, but for example, you mentioned jargon, industry specific terminology. By the way, that's what a lot of people do. A lot of people use complex language because they think that if they do that, then they sound smarter and more credible. The opposite is true. If you think about people who you consider smart and credible, often what they do is the opposite. They replace complex language with simple language, simple words, simple sentences. And by the way, the more complex the subject, of course, it always depends on the audience and the context, but in general, the more complex the subject, the more this becomes useful. And it's not about oversimplifying things, it's not about dumbing things down, it's about finding and using language that everybody in your audience can understand. And this is just one idea, if you want, connected to the importance of, or let's say, the primacy of the message over your delivery skills.
I totally agree, and I think that's true also for content creators. If you have a podcast, a YouTube channel, a blog, a newsletter, or something, that's the way to reach your audience, to really connect with your audience. If you are able to somehow simplify, complex ideas and messages, it makes a huge difference. I want to go back for a moment on the process, since you said that confidence comes from repetitions. When we read public speaking books, when we listen to experts, I think there are like maybe two main approaches. There is someone that says, once you have prepared your presentation, you have to repeat, and then you will feel confident on stage. And on the other side, there is someone saying that you don't need to do that. You just go, on stage, and you can kind of, improvise. What do you think? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm part of the former group. So for me, rehearsing is super, super important. So, for example, if we think about your ability to deliver a message in a way that's comfortable and convincing, and if you think about all of the possible challenges that you may have, that you may feel from a delivery perspective, most of them, if not all of them, can be solved or at least addressed simply by rehearsing. And so, again, talking about books, Raf, you made me think of another book, which is TED Talks by Chris Anderson. Now, Chris Anderson used to be, I think, not anymore, the founder, the organizer of the TED conference, and he wrote this book, TED Talks. And in that book, he uses a great analogy. He says a lot of people, and that's with me too. They tell me, you know what, I don't want to rehearse because if I do, then I sound robotic. And again, going back to where we started, I want to be myself. I want to be authentic. And Chris says that rehearsing is a bit like climbing a mountain. If you want to climb a mountain, then if you start going up and then you stop, you will never get to the top of the mountain. You need to keep climbing. You keep going up so that you reach the top and then you can start going down. When it comes to rehearsing, it's the same thing. So say, for example, Raf, that you have, I know that you speak in public a lot, and say that you have an important presentation in a few weeks from now, and say that you rehearse once or twice. Now, most people don't do that anyway, but let's say that we do it once or twice, and then you stop. Of course, yes, you will appear robotic. But when you appear robotic, it's not because you have rehearsed. Often it's because you haven't done it enough.
Okay.
You need to keep climbing. You need to get to the top of the mountain, which means that you need to rehearse a few more times. Now, how many times? There is no magic number. And there we go back to what you said at the beginning. You said, yes, we need to prepare in a certain way, but we need to do it I need to follow my own style. Yes, of course. What works for you does not necessarily work for me, but I can tell you that if I think about my clients, for most people, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts, Raf, but for most people, it's very, very hard to get to a point, to get to the top of the mountain. So to get to a point where you are able to appear spontaneous and to internalize your message. You don't have to memorize it, but you do need to internalize your message. But it's very hard to do that unless you've rehearsed on average 10 times. This is what I see with most people. And let me close with this, because you mentioned some people like to improvise. Now, with my clients, I see two types of speakers. You have the improvisers and the memorizers. So the memorizers like to have a script, word for word. The improvisers like to have more freedom on stage. And by the way, it's a spectrum. It's not that you are either 100% an improviser or 100% a memorizer. Maybe you are somewhere in between. Maybe you are a little bit more towards the memorizers or vice versa. However, first of all, we need to know where we are in this spectrum. That's useful to know because there are some important implications from a public speaking perspective. But also, once we know, it doesn't really matter whether you are an improviser or a memorizer. I would always encourage people to rehearse a few times. And especially for improvisers, I can promise them that every time they rehearse, they don't have to say exactly the same things. They are improvisers, so they can repeat their presentation, and every time they can use different words, different sentences. That's okay. But I can promise them that, for example, the fifth time they deliver the presentation is going to be much, much, much more powerful than the first.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree on that, and I also agree on the the magic number. You said at least 10 times. That's usually what I do. So it depends. I think it depends from two main factors for me. One is the audience. So sometimes if I know that the audience is kind of technical audience, people from my industry, I try to repeat a little bit more. And also it depends from the length of the presentation. So 20 minutes inspirational thought is one thing. 2 hours, super technical presentation is a completely different story. So yeah, but I agree on average, yeah, 10 times, and that's what I do.
And that's Ralph, is that is the number one consideration for everything, not just for how many times we rehearse. But you said it depends on the audience. Everything depends on the audience. Even what you say depends on the audience. The key to great presenting, and I use the word presentation a lot, public speaking, but we are talking about fundamental principles of communication in general. For example, you said we can apply this to content creation in general. Absolutely. So the key to great presenting is to always make it about them. The audience is to always talk to your audience about them, even if you're talking about you. Now, what most people do instead, whether they are aware of it or not, is they talk at their audiences about themselves. You want to talk to your audience about the audience, even if you're talking about you. For example, so if I tell you, Ralph, we have at Ideas on Stage, we have 58 offices all over the world, which, by the way, is not true, just a fictional example. So we have 58 offices all over the world. I'm talking at you about me. If I tell you at Ideas on Stage, we have 58 offices all over the world so that you can get access to a customer support team wherever you are. Now I'm talking to you about you, even if I'm talking about me. And this is just a simple example, but it can be applied even at a broader level. The key is to always make it about them. Everything depends on the audience.
I like this one, and I want to ask you something about this. Since you work with several clients in several industries, and you have a lot of experience in that, what are the main problems slash mistakes they make when preparing a presentation?
So, in addition to using presenting a message which is either too complex or too technical, so we talked about that already. The other one is that the very first thing most people do when preparing a presentation, is they just open PowerPoint and put together some slides. Now, I say PowerPoint, it could be any other presentation tool. It doesn't make any difference. We know that, of course, that is not the very first thing we want to do. But even if that's not the case, what many other people do is they start thinking about their messages, what they want to communicate. And that is already much better than just opening up PowerPoint. But even that is not the very first thing you want to do. So what is the very first thing? Again, we go back to the importance of the audience. We need to take some time and ask ourselves some questions about the audience, their their burning needs. What do they really need? What do they expect from your presentation? What do they expect to hear? What do they need to hear? For example, you said if I'm presenting to a very technical audience, then they may have some expectations, some needs, some concerns, and so you need to be aware of them if possible. What's the context? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, and this is a very common mistake, but I'm not saying that if you don't do that, then you can't create a great presentation. You can, but the risk is that you develop a fantastic presentation, but for the wrong audience.
Hmm.
For example, some time ago, we worked with a client. Her name is Marie from Paris. Marie is an executive. She's an expert in leadership. And she was invited by an association in Finland to give a talk about leadership. And she was super excited. It was one of her first international speaking opportunities. And so she prepared really well. She knew, remember, we talked about three key skills: message, visuals, and delivery. So she knew her message. She told us that she had prepared 50 beautiful slides, and also she rehearsed, she practiced properly. And then she flew to Finland the day before the conference and then arrived there on the day half an hour before the audience because she wanted to make sure that she had time to set things up. And when she was about to connect her laptop to the screen, she realized that there was no screen. So, a little bit of panic. She went and asked the organizers, assuming that they would say, "Oh, sorry, Marie, now we are going to fix this for you." What they did instead was they started laughing. They started laughing. And so she says, "Why are you laughing?" And they say, "Look, Marie, you want to show 50 slides, but actually you've been invited to give a talk to the association in Finland of blind people."
Wow.
Blind people. Now, Raf, I know it's an extreme example. It sounds like a bad joke, but it happened for real. You see, Marie was very well prepared, apart from one thing, the most important thing. She didn't know her audience. She didn't even take the time to translate the name of the association from Finnish to French, and she would have realized that perhaps there was no need to have 50 beautiful slides. So, what does this mean? If you want to make sure, you should want to make sure that, I say you, Raf, I'm talking in general. Yeah. If we want to make sure that our presentations are relevant to the audience, which is the number one principle in communication, before we do anything else, and that's not what people do, that going back to your question, that's the mistake. We need to start with them. We need to start with the audience.
I have a follow-up question on this. Because I think there are sometimes some situations where you don't know the audience and you don't have any way to have this information before. I'm giving a real example. So I usually do, public speaking in three situations. So one is like companies, so corporate stuff, private, small group. They call me, they pay me, they want me to talk to their, their audience. The second one is universities/schools, and the third one is like events, like a conference or something else. So there are some situations, especially with events and conferences, for example, where you don't actually know the audience until you are there, at the conference. How do you manage this situation? I mean, you can have an idea, a broad idea. Oh, we go there, the main topic is AI, so I suppose it's going to be about freelancers and entrepreneurs wanting to know more about AI. And then you go there and there are a lot of students that want to learn about AI. So what's the trick here? Do you have any suggestions for this kind of situation in particular?
Sure. So you're right. Sometimes it's not always possible to have a lot of information about the audience. However, the reason why I highlighted that as a key mistake is because often the reason why we don't know the audience is not because there's no way for us to find out more about the audience. It's simply because we don't take the time to either ask ourselves some questions about the audience, their needs, and the context, or asking somebody else. It could be, for example, at a conference. I'm not saying, Raf, that this always solves the problem, but if I also speak at conferences, then I always have and I don't want to take me as an example, but just to give an example, I always have say a pre-talk conversation with those who call me, with the organizers, asking them questions about the audience. It doesn't mean that they will be able to answer all your questions, but they will give you some insights. So the bottom line is that, of course, sometimes there are situations where you need to make assumptions, and you make assumptions based on your own experience, what worked in the past, what didn't work in the past. That's okay. But the problem I see is that sometimes, even though it would be possible to find out more about the audience, we don't, because we don't ask either ourselves or somebody else the right question. Sometimes, Ralph, it's also possible to ask directly the audience. Not always, but why not? No, many people don't even think about these as an option. But if it's possible we could send the audience through maybe the conference organizers a quick survey for them to answer three quick questions, or to answer just one question: what would you like to get out of my session? So I'm not saying that this is the solution that will work all the time, but if we think about it, there are many things we can do
Mm.
to get more information.
I think the main thing here is, do you actually care about the audience? If you care about the audience, you'll find a way. Andrea, thank you very much for this. We usually end these conversations here on the podcast with two simple questions. One is about books and one is about tools. Do you have something that you want to share with us? Any books that you love? Any books? It can be related to public speaking or anything else. Of course, your book is going to be linked in the description below, but any more books you want to share with my audience?
Sure. So I can split it into two parts: public speaking books, and then say life life books, which are even more important than public speaking. So when it comes to public speaking, so I'll give you a few authors, because many of them have written more than one book. But for example, I know that you know, because we had a previous conversation, Carmine Gallo, I think, is a great author. Books like Talk Like Ted, or the Storyteller Secret. Recently, last year, I think he published the Bezos Blueprint. So great books from Carmine Gallo. Now, my passion for public speaking started when I was at university, and I read what I think is a fascinating book, which is called Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds. And Gar, I also interviewed Gar and Carmine as well, by the way, on the Ideas on Stage podcast. Now, Gar wrote three books. One is Presentation Zen, which gives you the foundation of effective presenting. Then, for those who are interested in the design side of things, he wrote a second book, which is Presentation Zen Design. And then a third one, which is, I love the title, The Naked Presenter. And he talks about the fact that if you want to, and this is for delivery skills. So if you want to deliver your message effectively, you need to present naked, rather than, for example, relying on PowerPoint, or using a lectern, these kind of things. So three books by Gar Reynolds. And there's also, oh, by the way, Nancy Duarte, great books: Slideology, Resonate, Data Story, on data storytelling. And also Dr. John Medina, I also interviewed him for the podcast. Now, John Medina wrote an amazing book, which is Brain Rules, which is not just it's not a public speaking book, but he covers 12. So he's a scientist, and he covers 12 brain rules and applications for our everyday life. One application is communication. So there is one chapter which tells you what science tells us about what works and what doesn't work when it comes to communicating our ideas. And I believe that public speaking is a mix of art and science. So at least that chapter is, the whole book is fantastic. Made to Stick, We talked by the Heath brothers, fascinating book. Oh, by the way, this is the last one. I think that this is a masterpiece, which of course, it's much more than just public speaking, but in terms of communication, persuasion, influence by Robert Cialdini. So that is the book, if you want, I think. And that's for public speaking. Now, apart from public speaking, the most important book I've read in my life is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you know the book, Ralph.
Yeah.
Man's Search for Meaning. He goes through his story as a prisoner in Auschwitz, in the concentration camp. So the first half of the book is their story, and then Viktor Frankl is a psychologist, psychiatrist. So the second half is his psychological approach, so psychological life lessons coming from that experience. It's the book I've gifted the most, the number one book for me ever. Now, last year, I read another book, which I'm pretty sure you read too, because I know that you are, if I'm not wrong, I think I remember, maybe we talked about it in the past, you are very close to the Stoic philosophy. Is that correct? Right.
Yep.
Yep. So the Daily Stoic,
Yep.
Ryan Holiday is also a great book for those who want to learn more about that philosophy. It's one insight per day, a simple idea on the Stoic philosophy and how you can apply in everyday life. So these are two very powerful books for me beyond public speaking.
Great. What about tools? Do you have any tools you want to share with us?
So if you asked me that question, say last year or a couple of years ago, I would have told you, no, just a piece of paper. I think that if you really want to be effective in your communication and creative, especially at the initial stage of the presentation process, I think we need to forget technology. John Cleese says that we don't know where we get our ideas from, but what we do know is that we don't get them from our laptops. And I agree, if you really want to be creative and original, planning analog, which means a piece of paper or a flip chart or a whiteboard, post-it notes, is much more effective than going digital. Now, today, and again, you are the expert. So when it comes to AI, I've never seen something like that. So every day I use artificial intelligence. Now I'm not a super expert, so for now I'm stuck with ChatGPT, but I know that there are other options. But today, what can be done with the help of ChatGPT or AI in general in the process, or also in the process of creating a presentation, is mind blowing. However, I need to say that for me, it's very important that it's that combined with, remember, Ralph, at the beginning we talked about having some foundational skills. So that is still super important, because if you tell ChatGPT, look, I need to, and I know that people do it because I say it also with content creation, by the way, I need to give a presentation on this topic with this audience, create a presentation for me. So that prompt is super generic, and so the outcome will be very generic too. But if you have the foundational skills to ask the right questions, evaluate the answers, so that knowledge combined with what artificial intelligence can do today is mind-blowing, super powerful. And I say this as a public speaking coach, no using artificial intelligence today as you prepare your talks, your presentations, is stupid.
Yeah. Andrea, where can they find you, follow you, read you? Do you have any links you want to share with us?
Yeah, thank you. Now, the main space for me is LinkedIn, so people can find me there. Our website is ideasonstage.com. Perhaps just one thing, if people want to assess their current presentation skills against some key fundamental principles of communication, we have a tool on our website, or the URL is our website, ideasonstage.com/score, like when you score a goal. And it's a way for you to assess your current presentation skills in just a few minutes. You answer a few questions. It's free, by the way, and you get a score from 0 to 100%. and then the tool will tell you what that score means for you, and it also identifies opportunities for improvement.
Perfect. Great. All the links are going to be in the description below. Andrea, thank you so much for your time. It was great.
Thank you, Ralph.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something new. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify to stay updated on new episodes. With your support, I can continue to bring great content and great guests to this podcast. So hit the subscribe button now, and I'll see you in the next episode.